Trailer Trash
Howdy, you all. My name is Boudreaux. I'm a sapient, hyper-intelligent cybernetic ghost from the future. It's my job to keep the host of this podcast, Vic Hermanson, from sounding like an absolute fool. I bid you a hearty, cybernetic welcome to Trailer Trash Terrors.
Hello, my name is Vic Hermanson, and I'm coming to you from the beautiful and almost hidden town of Mugwamp, Louisiana. I'm here with my pal Boudreaux, and our show is called Trailer Trash Terrors. You're dang right I'm trailer trash. I'm not sure about Boudreaux.
Humans, this is Season 1, Episode 1. Keeping Vic Hermanson from sounding like a total fool is a real challenge, by the way.
Well, you made it. I'm so very glad you're here. The fact that you are listening means I did at least one thing right. With your help, over time, I'll try to do more things right. Sooner or later, I hope to get the hang of this podcasting thing. I want my podcast to be something that people look forward to listening to every single week. There are thousands of podcasts streaming over the web and through the air that label themselves as paranormal or some version of paranormal. If you don't like that word, you might try metaphysical, spectral, preternatural, mysterious, unearthly, mystical, otherworldly, enigmatic, esoteric, or my favorite word, thaumaturgic. That's an awesome word. Thaumaturgic.
That's a big word for your small brain, Vic Hermanson. Thaumaturgic, adjective, having, brought about by, or relating to supernatural powers or magic.
One can very reasonably ask, why are there so many paranormal, cryptozoological, and mysterious podcasts? That answer is simple, because the topics and the stories are fascinating. Almost every little kid will immediately pick up a book about monsters, or ghosts, or mysteries, or Bigfoot, or aliens. They do so without prompting, and they are fascinated by what they find in those books. Some of us never outgrow that phase, and we spend the rest of our lives learning all we can about subjects, events, history, and phenomena we will probably never fully understand. That's okay with me. I don't need to fully understand. But so often the community splits along contentious, insulting, and angry lines. There are unambiguous and undoubting believers. There are aggressive and equally certain skeptics. Usually, they don't like each other very much at all. I try very hard to not be in either camp. I just love the stories. I love the feeling of wonder they invoke. I love the rare times when something concrete actually is found. I love the way these topics make the world far more interesting. So, that's why my show will at least partially focus on topics such as these. But I want to do something a little different from most other shows. In fact, two things. First, I want to find the deep stories. I want to find the stories that truly impacted or changed people's lives. I want to delve into them deeply. I want to see what I can learn, and what we can all learn about the human state. I want to end each show knowing more than I knew before the show started, or at least trying to. I want to find the answers that can be found in mainstream science, in rare ancient tomes, and esoteric lore and legend. I'm also not going to just talk about terrors, but all of the parts of the paranormal and normal life that I find so incredibly fascinating. So on this show, in addition to terrors, we'll also delve as deeply as we can into trailer trash treasures, trailer trash theology, trailer trash epiphanies, trailer trash tragedies, trailer trash wonders, trailer trash Forteana, trailer trash cryptids, trailer trash terminations, trailer trash tricksters, and, of course, trailer trash triumphs. I think it should be a fun ride. I hope you'll choose to ride along with me. Second, I want my podcast to have a real home. I always loved the way Garrison Keillor made Lake Wobegon the home for a prairie home companion. It was fun. Everyone knew that Lake Wobegon existed only in Keillor's mind, but pretty soon it existed in the minds of millions. Where he paced his town around silos and powder milk biscuits, I'm basing mine around the incredible weirdness of my childhood in the hidden depths of Louisiana. I really did grow up in a tiny town, actually a village in deep rural Louisiana. Sometime in the deep past, it was a thriving little metropolis. Then something changed, and it became a place where most people had few opportunities and perceived even less wonder. But I had the eyes of a curious child, and those eyes can see wonder anywhere. My memories of that poverty-stricken wide place in the road are full of wonder, mystery, fascinating people, a tiny trailer, hidden creatures, and yes, plenty of terror. Plenty of terror indeed. The home of this podcast will be about the shaded, sweltering, and mysterious town of Mugwamp, Louisiana. Let me tell you about it. Between 1800 and 1900, several of the great railroads, the Texas Pacific, the Kansas City Southern, and some other lines began the task of carving up Louisiana for the purpose of moving goods and people. Colonel Lincoln LaMarche Lathrop devoted his entire fortune to building a railroad town in the vast, untouched wilderness. He bought 46,080 acres, or 2 survey townships, just east of what is now the Kisatchie National Forest. In his many travels, he had come to admire the Algonquin people for their industry, their intelligence, and their absolute unbending honor. The Algonquin people called their great chief Mugwamp, Mugquomp. Colonel Lathrop chose that name for his town. But the clerk in Baton Rouge didn't ask for the correct spelling, so the town became Mugwamp, Mugwamp. Colonel Lathrop smiled as he rode his horse through the deep forest back to his future town, with the articles of incorporation for the great metropolis of Mugwamp safely in his coat pocket. By 1905, the Louisiana oil boom was in full swing, and Colonel Lathrop's dream of a great rural metropolis was coming true. The town had a bank, a small hospital, a school with 2 teachers from Germany, a trolley through the town that extended out to the beautiful Lake Waxahachie, a few miles away, close to the Sabine River. By the late 1930s, all the factors that had made the town prosperous had run their course. The oil that was easiest to recover was gone. The timber that still seemed infinite had few customers because no oil filled the tanker cars. The town, just like thousands of others across the country, became a stagnant, crumbling collection of buildings that had once housed the greatest of human dreams and the greatest of human failures. Have you ever heard the term genius loci? It means the spirit of a place. The Romans thought in terms of places truly being sacred and having actual protective spirits. Today in the secular West, we usually just use the term to mean the character or feel of a place. But Mugwamp had many spirits. I can't tell you if the spirits arose from the land, or from the people whose dreams and lives were slowly drained away, or from the ancient Oaxaca tribe that hunted the mastodon and giant horses that once roamed these lands. Maybe the Fae, the nature spirits that permeated the swamps and forests, came to love the town. Maybe the love, devotion, hatred, betrayal, trust, fear, hope, joy, and despair of the people who lived there simply permeated the buildings, the soil, the old tracks of the trolley, the parks where children played, and the hospital where the elderly, the disease-ridden, and those injured in the oil fields came to die. It doesn't really matter, but to use a biblical term, the genius loci of Mugwamp, even to this day, is indeed Legion. You've seen movies where a town won't let people leave, or the land demands a sacrifice every few years. You've seen movies where strangers are eyed suspiciously, and you find yourself saying, "Just get back in your car and drive down the road, you idiot." You've seen movies where some huge decaying mansion on the edge of the town houses a horrible, slathering, atavistic secret, something endowed with ragged teeth, ripping claws, and unquenchable hatred. Some unnamed horror that occasionally escapes and roams the town, taking a victim that the town promptly forgets. Mugwamp could be all these things, but mainly it seemed to be a haven for wandering spirits, exhausted and bedraggled, simply longing for some place to rest, to sleep the sleep of the spiritually starved, and eventually die. It was, and is, full of these spirits. When I came into the world, Mugwamp had evolved into a town that most of the world simply chose to ignore. It was a wide place along a minor and neglected state highway that wound through the thick central Louisiana forests. At any given time, 400 souls would call it home. There were artifacts spread through the town, artifacts that carried the spirit of another, more prosperous time. Walk with me once through this town, or, if not me, at least the memory of 8-year-old Vic Hermanson.
Vic Hermanson, might I suggest that you move things along? I mean, the information is fascinating and all, but you are monumentally boring. Plus, the audience has no idea why I am here other than to limit your foolishness.
We'll start at my trailer that sits on irregular concrete blocks right next to the state highway. There's a ditch between the highway and the trailer, and my dad raises minnows in it. The trailer is a 1958 Hicks. It's 10 feet by 41 feet. It's an ultraliner that was made in Prairie View, Texas. Most of the ultraliners were sold to oil exploration companies to house their workers, and ours was no exception. A keen eye would perceive that the trailer had no hurricane or tornado strapping. If we walk east from the trailer, the first thing we find is an abandoned ammonia absorption ice factory. This was the factory where huge blocks of ice would be made and distributed around the town before electrical refrigeration was common. If there is any place in the world that should have been haunted, it was this building. Huge vats of water were still recessed into the floors. A massive network of copper pipes hung down in complete chaos, looking like huge malevolent spiders. Chains and winches still hung from crane structures high up in the building. There were snakes and rats and even the occasional nutria in the vats of water. Men had been murdered there, and their bodies left to rot in the stifling Louisiana heat. Some of the offices along the outer wall still had panes of glass in the windows, and damp, molding ledgers still set atop several of the rusting metal desks. Lights filtered in from high, broken windows, and the walls themselves spoke of past regret and betrayal. Let's not linger here long, as there obviously is, or has been, great evil in this place. The stench and fetid memory of that evil oozes from the old factory's stained and pitted walls. We exit the ice factory through a huge, jagged hole in the southern wall. Watch your step. Sometimes that rubble shifts. We are at the northwest corner of what is obviously a huge forest of pine trees, with occasional deciduous interlopers. To the left, there is a forest as far as you can see. On the edges of the forest, the shadows fight with the sun, but deeper in, the shadows are clearly dominant. We walk past the outer trees, and any breeze we felt before is suddenly gone. Our steps are almost silent on the thick carpet of pine needles. Stand still and look into the distance. Do you see them? Those darker shadows, the things that peek from behind trees. Anyone who takes the time will see these things in the forest. Being a boy who loved the forest, my mind tended to filter out the shadows that were not the result of block light. My mind tended to filter them out, at least in the daytime. At night, by the light of the moon, and porch lights, and occasional passing headlights, they were so much more evident and visible, and my mind could not choose to be blind to them. As we walk southwest, the sounds of the highway fade, and several small brooks make a dancing sound. My feet know where to go, and we come to a bridge made of several large pine trunks, held together with black forged iron. Why isn't it rusted? I never found the answer to that mystery. We stop in the middle of the old bridge, and the sound of the brook somehow seems very far away and muffled. Even when we speak to each other, our voices sound muffled and distant. The few friends I have and I call it the screaming place. To a young boy, it was just a pleasing mystery. But we walk farther into the woods, and soon there is more light filtering through the boughs. We see ribbons tied to some of the trunks, and occasionally a dirty, primitive doll can be seen on the forest floor. We hear children playing and soon find ourselves in a clearing, looking at a large log cabin, or more accurately, a collection of log cabins that have been joined together with whatever materials were at hand: corrugated metal, asphalt siding, old plywood, rough-hewn logs, and old salvaged windows. The cabin is painted with whatever paint had found its way into the forest. It's a cabin like Joseph's coat of many colors. This is the home of the huge and wonderful Province family, descended from some of the first people who settled Louisiana. Oh, they seem poor, but they have wealth that most people can't imagine. The first time I wandered back to the cabin, an ancient, toothless woman walked out to meet me. She said, "You hold still, child, while I mugrify." She gently touched my head, stroked my curly hair, and held my hands in hers. They were very soft and warm. She stared in my eyes a long time. Her dress was made of old, colorful material that had been mended many times. It was pristinely clean. She had an apron with huge pockets. From one of these, she pulled out a Bible, an old, tattered, leather-covered Bible. She opened her Bible and immediately found the verse she wanted. "The Lord watches over the sojourners. He upholds the widow and the fatherless. But the way of the wicked he brings to ruin." Then she smiled. "You ain't got no haints in you at all. How'd you find your way back here? Come and play with all these children. You call me Grandma Sally." Her warmth and acceptance made me feel very happy inside. The normal shyness between children faded away almost instantly, and it was as if they were old friends. But soon, I noticed that the hands and feet of about half the children were very wide. When they were still, I could see that they had 6 fingers and 6 toes, real fingers. Finally, I asked the kindly old lady why the family's hands and feet were the way they were. And she said, "Child, God made us this way. It means we're guardians. That's the guardian hand. Hain't see that strong hand with that extra finger, and they will not come out of the shadows. It's a gift from God. It's a gift from the Lord, and our family is very blessed." She held up her own hands, and my eyes had to strain to fully understand them. They were perfect and wide, and her 6 fingers were quick and nimble. And this was not a deformity. This was a gift. Then she beamed at me and said, "Now, you go play. Perhaps later we will visit with these unusual and powerful people more. But now we need to further explore the town." We walk back toward the west and exit the forest about a quarter of a mile south of the small trailer where I live. We must walk around a 10-foot fence that separates a recently inactive oil derrick from the rest of the world. The derrick itself is at least 100 feet tall. It's surrounded by rusted, discarded equipment and 55-gallon drums of noxious-smelling chemicals. There are dead birds scattered over the drilling site. My dad told me that when they first started building the site, they found mastodon bones and even tusks, as well as a 4-foot glyptodon shell. In 1955, the foreman decided that reporting such finds would only bring bureaucrats and egghead to his drilling site, so they were simply bulldozed back into the earth. The Province family said they could still see and hear the shades of bands of small, muscular men pursuing and killing a huge animal with horns and a trunk. But I never saw or heard this. I didn't have the guardian hand. It's close to noon, and the Louisiana sky is now hazy. The cicadas are deafening. If the paint were not worn and chipped off the big thermometer at the general store, you would see that the red liquid extended up to 98 degrees. If you have a nickel, you can get a Coke from the big red machine inside. Usually, those Cokes are so cold that bits of ice float in the bottle. If you drink it too fast, you'll get a headache. Ice attack, we called it. Some of the inventory in the general store dates back 40 years. Hamlin's Wizard Oil. I always joked it was made with real wizards. Dr. Rupert Wells Radol, for internal use only, infused with radium. The truth is, most of the store was a time machine for anyone who wished to traverse its dusty aisles. On a cooler day, we'll walk by the Lathrop Mansion and watch the shapes moving behind the windows. We'll go to see Miss Maddie's house, where the flowers always bloom, even when the sun has killed all the other plants and yards in town. And we'll wait till sundown, when our eyes can see the flying things, huge, black, and distant, over the still, shimmering lake. The further south you go, the more the lake resembles a swamp. Oh yes, we'll explore that one day, too. Yes, these are the memories of a child. But as my father said, never let those pesky facts get in the way of a good story. Bring your stories, your memories, your dreams, and the lingering thoughts you have of dark shapes moving in the woods or behind drawn curtains. They will always be welcome in Mugwamp. We'll find them a home. They will not be lonely. This week, we have only one story, and it comes from my past. I call the story, which is 100% true, The Glide Monster. Welcome to Mugwamp. I sure hope you enjoy your stay.
That is amazing. Vic Hermanson actually did a credible job of introducing the story. It seems that wonders never cease. After the story, I'll be back to invite you to next week's high-quality and carefully produced podcast. LOL times 10 to the 23rd power. And now, the Glide Monster.
My name is Victor, and I grew up in a tiny town in Louisiana. One of the strangest places I've ever encountered in my entire life since then. I have many stories about the town, but there's one that I have thought would be particularly of interest, and that is the story of how I, as a 6-year-old boy, started a town panic over what I perceived to be a monster, and what many of the people in the town perceived as being a monster. Let me tell you the story. We lived in a trailer, back end of the world, I guess about a 40-foot trailer, and it was a family of 4 at the time: my father, my mother, my sister, and myself. My mom and dad shared a bedroom, my sister had a bed in the room we slept in, and I, being so small, slept on a big wide shelf up in the top of the room. And I loved sleeping up there, simply because it was so high, and because there was sometimes a breeze coming out, and I could look out and see the moon, and I could hear animals. There was of course no air conditioning, and this was Louisiana. In the summer, it was quite hot. there weren't that many kids who lived in that area, and I had made a few friends. Where we played would just absolutely drive any safety organization insane now. We were essentially playing in abandoned ice houses and toxic dumps. No joke. And when a new family moved in, it meant that, hey, there's maybe a chance I'll have somebody to play with. So there was a boy named James in that family. And they had come up from deep southern Louisiana, Cajun country. And they were definitely a Cajun family. So shyly I went down and made friends with this boy and his sister, and we started roaming around the woods, and I showed them the treasures I had found, and I showed them the hiding places I had, and they of course told me their stories. And one of the main stories that they told me was about the loup-garou, which was their version of the boogeyman, the werewolf, the thing in the woods, the thing that parents use to keep their kids at home at night. And so they had all kinds of loup-garou stories, and they would tell me how he was furry and strong and had massive teeth and would rip your head off. And being a 6-year-old boy with a big imagination, I was absolutely fascinated by this. So I can remember lying on my bed or my shelf at night, looking out over this forest, because we did live next to a big, huge, beautiful pine forest, and I would play out there a lot, much to my mother's chagrin. And most nights, I would occasionally see a deer. I would hear little scurrying sounds. I knew they were skunks and squirrels. But this night, I saw something I had never seen before. I saw what I started calling the glide monster. And of course, I was convinced in my mind that it was a loup-garou. And what I saw was out just behind the front of the trees, there was this darker figure that would move in a way that I had never seen anything move before. It had long arms. It seemed to have no legs at all. It was pretty massive. It was a strong, wrestler-type body. I couldn't see the face. All I could see, I couldn't even see if it had clothes or if it had fur. All I could see was that really, really bizarre movement. And of course I was stuck between screaming and being terrified, but it was off in the woods, so I didn't think it would hurt me, and just being fascinated of watching this thing. And so I watched it until it did its gliding movement back into the forest, and then it was gone, at least for that night. And so I crawled down from my shelf and I woke my sister up and I said, Marty, there's a glide monster out there. It's probably a loup-garou. And of course she was, oh, Victor, go back to sleep. Why the hell are you waking me up? At midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. So I put it aside, but the next day I went to school and my sister went to school, and I started telling the story about the glide monster, the loup-garou. And the other kids listened, and pretty soon they were going home and telling their fathers and their mothers about the loup-garou or the glide monster. And I would see it multiple times. So for nights and nights and nights after that, I would watch. And more nights than not, I would see the glide monster. I finally started trying to figure out how big it was. I went out and I looked at bushes and looked at trees to see how tall this thing is. And I'm going to say it was close to 3.5, maybe almost 4 feet tall. And it moved in a way, like I said, that I had never seen before. Well, pretty soon, the town started becoming somewhat panicked about the loup-garou, the glide monster in the woods. And it wasn't long until we had people with rifles and shotguns and traps and various things that were coming to traipse through our yard to try to find the loup-garou. And at this point, my mother became pretty angry about this, and I was becoming just absolutely terrified. So she goes out and gets the sheriff, and the sheriff comes out and says, look, you stay off these people's property. You're surely not going to bring your rifles and your shotguns out here. We got kids out here. Stay away. And over time, the people faded away. But the Glide Monster didn't. The Glide Monster stayed, and I would see it, like I say, more nights than most, and I was becoming absolutely terrified and obsessed with this creature. And so I would cry, and I would tell my mom, and I would say, they're going to come and get us. So here's where the story becomes real again. My mother, who was well known to all the families in the area, very kind woman, would help people when they needed money, would help people when they needed rides, would help people when kids were sick. One day she said to me, "Okay, Victor, you need to follow me." And we walked through the woods. And we walked farther into those woods than I had ever walked before. And we came to a house. It was a fairly large cabin made out of split logs. And it had been sitting there in the Louisiana humidity for probably 100 years. She knocked on the door, and an elderly woman in a calico dress and hair up in a bun came out to the porch and said, "Hi, Mary, how are you?" And they were happy to see each other, and obviously they had been friends for a long time. And she looked at my mom and she said, "Are you here about the town?" And she said, "Yes, I am." She said, "Victor is really, really, really frightened, and I need you to help us." And the lady said, "All right." So she bent down and she got on her knees and she was looking me straight in the eye, and she said, "Son, why are you afraid?" I said, "Because of the Glide Monster. I see that Glide Monster almost every night." And she says, "Have you ever met a monster?" I said, "No, I've never met a monster, but I've seen one out my window." And she had the most tender, gentle voice of almost any woman I'd ever heard. And she said to me, "Listen, child, there is no monster, but I can tell you what's gliding through the forest. I can even let you meet what's gliding through the forest. But you have to be very brave, and you have to also promise not to tell anyone." My mother looked at me, shook her head, or nodded her head, and I said, "Okay." So we went into the house, and there were many people living there. There were children, there were other elderly people, there were mothers and fathers. I have no idea who they all were. But she said, "Now, it's time for you to meet my son Wilson." And so we would go into a room, and there, sitting in a chair, with absolutely no legs, is Wilson. And Wilson was a man that was perhaps, if he had had legs, he probably would have been 6'8", 6'9". He would have been built like a linebacker, like a football player. He had heavy gloves on his hands. He had incredible, massive shoulders. And he smiled at me. And he said, "I understand you're afraid of me." I said, "Well, who are you?" He said, "I'm what you're seeing moving through the woods at night. It's the only time I can go out." And so he showed me. He had the same, I've learned later that he had the exact same genetic anomaly as the circus performer Johnny Eck. He was just much, much, much larger. And he had incredible skill at moving around simply using his hands. He was also massively strong. He was completely able to pull himself up a tree simply using his hands. And since he didn't go out very much, the town people had been cruel to him. He was very shy. He was frightened to go out, but he did go out at night in order to see the world. And it also turns out that he was an incredibly kind and pleasant and gentle man. And I sat there and talked to him for a long time. He showed me his drawings. He showed me the books that he read. He showed me the things he could do with no legs. The disease, I believe, is called sacrolegenesis. And he actually did have legs. They were just tiny, useless legs they used cloth to hold them up so that they didn't get in his way. So anyway, after about an hour of talking to him, I felt my fear go away. The grandmother lady came in and said, "All right, child, are you frightened anymore?" I said, "No, ma'am." And my mother gave her a hug, and she said, "Thank you so much. And I will talk to my son about spreading rumors." And she did. And we walked quietly through the woods, holding my mother's hand. And she told me about how she had met this family years ago and had helped this woman take Wilson to the doctor several times. Wilson was healthy now. But I would sleep there on my shelf on the upper part of that room, looking out my window in the hot Louisiana summer, hoping for a breeze. And when I saw Wilson, when I saw the glide monster moving through the town or moving through the trees, I would relax and know that I had a friend who at one time I thought was a monster.
Vic Hermanson, how about a bit of constructive criticism? After all, that is my job. You should have re-recorded the story with your current microphone and preamp. There is an audible difference. Second, you've extended this podcast to almost 37 minutes. Don't you think that is pushing it for someone of your limited mental capacity?
I guess I haven't told the full story of Boudreaux, but that's going to have to wait. Boudreaux's my pal, and he's a bit arrogant, but he can be very useful, and even funny. He's probably right, though. I should start to bring this podcast to a close. But before I do, there's one more thing I want to talk about, and that is the Thomas theorem. Because really, the story of Wilson, and the story of the town, and the story of my reaction, is indeed the story of the Thomas theorem. The Thomas theorem can be easily encapsulated in one sentence. It's a sentence that was coined in 1928 by William Isaac Thomas and Dorothy Swain Thomas. If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. Of course, everyone listening to this show already knows that. But it is an interesting thing to study in terms of how humans behave. It's part of sociology, and of course it's been expanded to apply to every part of society, gender, race, everything. We are not going to deal with very many controversial issues on this show. Probably won't get into conspiracy theories very much at all. Certainly we're not going to deal with contentious political issues. When you do so, that takes away from your moment-to-moment wonder at the miraculous nature of the world. But here in the little town of Mugwamp, we had an entire community that believed that something malicious, malignant, dangerous existed in that forest, and that they were justified in coming to my home as a young boy with shotguns, with implements of destruction, hoping to eliminate what they felt to be a threat in their neighborhood. Everybody in the story. Wilson felt himself to be unable to receive any response from the community other than ridicule. That may not have been true. Perhaps Wilson limited his behavior in a way that wasn't absolutely necessary. I believed there was a glide monster. I believed it was a loup-garou. My actions were that because of that belief, I told other people that there was a monster in the woods behind our trailer. I never had any inkling that people would really act on those words. So anyway, that's the Thomas theorem. And I think with that, we will bring the show to a conceptual close. I'll have more to say in a minute about how to contact us, getting us your stories, and essentially, I always want to tell you how grateful I am for your time and for listening to the best efforts I have to give. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, it's time for all the formal ending stuff. Trailer Trash Terrors is written and produced by me, Vic Hermanson, with help from Boudreaux, of course. The music you heard was provided by Loco Lobo and Smart Sound. Our social media presence will be expanded in the next few weeks, but for now, if you want to get in touch with us, please just write to trailertrashterrors@gmail.com. We need your stories. As you can see, we are just a wee bit different here. If you have a story that you have thought is too odd to share anywhere else, please call us. Please send it to us. We want it, we need it, and we will present it with respect and understanding. Thanks again.
Vic Hermanson always takes all the credit. It's a human foible. This has been a CyberGhost production, copyright 2022. If you have listened to this entire podcast, you can apply for legal compensation through the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham and Howe. Your application has a 0.000000001% chance of being approved, but you can apply if you like doing that sort of thing.